Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Alex Lukas. I'm an associate professor of print and publication at the University of California at Santa Barbara. And thank you for joining me. I organized this panel, Publication Praxis Zine Pedagogy Within and Against the Academy. And I have one slide to show as my introduction. This is a 2004 photo of my courier bag with copies that were for the first zine that Printed Matter ever sold of mine. And this comes to mind a lot when I think about how, for this panel, focusing on how we teach zine making at the college level and some of those inherent contradictions. And for me, you know, thinking about making a zine right out of college, it was all about kind of like scamming photocopies. So there was a Office Depot on Broadway in New York down by NYU that I would go and spend hours in and make thousands of copies and then go up to the clerk and say, you know, with the self-service, let's say I made 15, and I don't think they cared, and I got away with it, and there's a lot of privilege involved with that. But when students then come to me and say, how do you make a book after graduation? There's sort of this like, oh, I don't know, you kind of got to figure out a way to do it, and that's this DIY ethos. So thinking about then how, as educators, we can structure a curriculum to both support that spirit while also exist within the academy is the focus of our talk today. So we have 4 educators and artists and publishers who are speaking today. I'm going to give a brief introduction before everyone, let everyone do about a 5-minute slideshow. Then I've got a couple questions and we'll open up to the audience for Q&A. So our first presenter, Mark Allen. Mark Allen is a former curator, occasional graphic designer, and profligate mail art sender and professor of art at Pomona College. Between 2003 and 2018, he was the executive director of Machine Project, a nonprofit art space which produced over 2,000 events in 15 years, including operas for dogs, vacations for plants, and concerts for dentists, as well as shows at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Hammer Museum at UCLA, the MCA in Denver, and the Walker Museum in Minneapolis, as well as the Tang Teaching Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York. Mark, all yours.
Thanks for having me. Hello. I like to think of this as sort of the amuse-bouche of this talk. I was doing my grading last week, and so I photographed some pieces my students made, and maybe that's a good way to kind of go into it. Do I do the slides up there? No, I can too. I'd prefer. I'm just in the wrong place. Okay, so anyway, I teach at Pomona College. It's like 40 minutes east of LA. It's a private college. It has a lot of money. And so that makes a nice angle for how I work with the students, because after you graduate, you have this problem. But while you're there, I try to encourage them to basically use as much materials as possible, sell them at book fairs. And I think that that's kind of the 2 angles that I approach it from. One is like, how does your work circulate in the world? How does it circulate in communities, but also financially? I think that it's very useful economy. I mean, obviously we all think that because we're here. And then I think the other thing is like, what's your support network after you graduate from school? And for me, it's about self-organizing, doing projects with each other. And so I try to get them a little bit of an introduction to that. And so a lot of what they do is very zine-ish. I did a mail art class this semester where we exchanged mail with another class over Arbor Day. So this is a leaflet about different types of roots, square roots, hair roots, root beer. Oh, wrong way, sorry. Oh my God. This was a publication that's all made of leaves. I mean, it's paper that's printed to look like leaves. This was an exchange we did with University of New Mexico, where the students at New Mexico designed half of the zine, and then they sent it to my students, and they designed the other half. The publication my students did together. And then that's a card my student made that I told him it'd be fine to send through the mail, but he told me maybe not. So he's sending them to various locations with a self-addressed envelope so they can kind of send it on. So really that's all I prepared. I think that the way I think it's particularly useful in academia is really helping them understand a context for making artwork that's sort of outside of their classes or outside of their fellow students. I'm also really interested in networks. So your network in your local community is a big thing for me. But one of the reasons I've been teaching these mail art classes where we exchange work with people in all these different places is the internet just seems really toxic. And my students, this is something like they really talk about. And so I think that the zine or the publication is really on this sweet space of the material, a balance of like the handmade and mechanically made, and something that can circulate. So that's my intro. We'll move on.
Cool. Yes, polite applause in between, always welcome.
I might have turned the mic up.
Oh. Yes? Cool. Okay. Hesitant nods, just like a classroom here. Brandon Bandy, our next presenter, is an artist in Long Beach, California, whose practice examines visual conventions and artistic production amidst the domination of online platforms and erosion of institutions. In collaboration with Rachel Jackson, Brandon organizes exhibitions at LA-based gallery Timeshare and co-operates special effects, producing art books and editions regarding the intertwine of information technology, economy, conspiracy, and visual culture within post-industrial society. Brandon received an MFA from UC Riverside and is currently a lecturer at Cal State Bakersfield and Fullerton.
All right, thank you. I have a lot of slides, but I'm going to try and go through them relatively quickly. Site distribution legibility is sort of like a chunk of writing, a presentation, a project that my partner Rachel and I have been working on for a while. So this is excerpts sort of from the last really 6 years of kind of working on and kind of thinking about these three topics. So I start out all my syllabi with this phrase as a kind of starting point, regardless of whether what I'm teaching. The means of reproduction are used politically and commercially to disguise or deny what their existence makes possible, but sometimes individuals use them differently. That's a quote from the print version of Ways of Seeing by John Berger. And I don't know, I guess for me, it's like one of the most kind of clear and simple ways of, for me, defining like what an artist might be interested in doing. So after the ready-made and certainly after the widespread adoption of communication technology, the primary question which remains relevant for the visual arts is what forms and tactics provide a meaningful container for radical propositions of art's nature. So if the ready-made is this point where the artwork can kind of disperse into air, sort of circulate as an idea or a photograph of a work, or disappear completely, and then information technology, the internet sort of develops sort of also in the 20th century, and thinking about like, okay, how can artwork circulate outside of physical space? So this is a map that we created of sites of engagement, and one of the things that we're always sort of talking about is with different modes of making or different modes of kind of distribution of work having different integrity of context. And another axis of the kind of scale that comes with that. So one of the things that we're really interested in, and part of the reason that I think LA art history is so great is there's a really rich history of site-specific, situationally derived work. The artists we might usually sort of think of when we say institutional critique. So that having a great sort of integrity of context, because the work is created kind of in tandem with the context with which it's shown, but also it's usually an artwork sort of in a singular place, and so its distribution is maybe limited. On the other sort of extreme, we have online art exhibition documentation, so thinking about the way that certainly with things like Contemporary Art Daily, the way that that filters into something like Contemporary Art Daily's Instagram account. The distribution for work of art has never sort of been larger, but also the integrity of the context, becomes kind of eroded. And publications kind of being this sweet spot up here where we have the context sort of laminated with the artwork itself, and also we have this potential for distribution. Commercial galleries, museums, and online platforms are the primary frameworks through which visual art is promoted and filtered. In the early days of digital space, there was a liberatory potential in its reach and freedom. The abolition of gatekeepers promised a more democratic future. Even in the early days of Web 2.0 platforms, there still seemed to be potential as a site of engagement. As these platforms matured, the potential has dwindled. Artists are now creators, and art is now demoted to being content. Monetization is the ideal, autonomy is questionable, and the homogenization of art is certain. These are some projects that I always sort of teach in thinking about this question of like art online or distribution of art. So these are images from this Tumblr blog called The Jogging that was active 10 plus years ago, which was a Tumblr blog in which this kind of semi-anonymous group of artists made these sort of artworks, which were really just made to be sort of photographed, put online, and kind of travel in this space, which was not necessarily an art context, but more so thinking about like ideas of the accidental audience and what happens when someone kind of stumbles across this. The Jogging turned into UV Production House, which was an Etsy store. So moving from Tumblr to Etsy, and they would make these sort of satirical products that one could actually purchase, but it was a way of sort of artistic production without any overhead. So you didn't need a studio. Everything was a Photoshop mock-up. If someone bought it, the product or the materials to make the product were drop shipped to you. So thinking about that kind of potential of like sidestepping the gallery, art dealers, that kind of thing. Obviously, Etsy wasn't a huge fan of this, and so it doesn't exist anymore. Another great example of distributed work online is David Horowitz's mood disorder. So he took this image, he inserted it in the Wikipedia article for mood disorder, and again, the editors of Wikipedia were not so happy about this. Other sort of things which have come and gone, such as Intellectuals, which was a kind of shit-posting Instagram account, mostly run by a sort of group of artists that was a really interesting kind of Instagram-based meme page, but also sort of artistic project. Now there's this thing called Pirates of the Car Bomb Infantry, which is this sort of weird kind of dispersed project where artists are sort of handed the keys to this Instagram account, and their sort of exhibition is they make artworks, take photographs of them, and post them on this account. It's kind of semi-anonymous. I'm going to try and speed through this. So NetArt and PostNet is full of interesting projects with some contemporary successors utilizing platforms against the grain. But artists and publishers now seem to have fully kind of adopted and conformed to the logic of platforms, whether this be the creation of frictionless work for maximizing audience reach, or kind of leaning into this kind of influencer artist persona, which usually kind of overtakes and subsumes artistic output. Where can art go that is free from the financial incentives to create palatable and frictionless content? That is the question I really think about all the time, and certainly kind of always prod my students to kind of figure out. How can art escape the flattening and context collapse, which is a symptom of platform design? These being good examples. Why publishing now and why higher education now? To me, these are the kind of the same questions. Integrity of context. And this is not to necessarily say, to tie like a specific meaning to a work or to explain it, but to sort of work within a site that can permanently embed context alongside artwork. Distribution, making work accessible, low cost, or free while aiming for a broad and dispersed audience. And while, zine making is, slightly different than higher education in this realm, I still think that like oftentimes, small publishers' works are collected by university libraries, and so the two kind of rely on each other, I think. Archival capacity, artist-run projects are great, Small publishers are great, but at a certain point, it requires a certain level of like resources to archive and preserve these things moving forward. Slowness, and both in making publications and the time it takes to kind of collate and design something, and also the university system kind of being intentionally slow in adopting and thinking about new ideas. It kind of, especially now, helps kind of sidestep our very kind of quick and cheap culture. And autonomy, and this is kind of the biggest one that I really push students to think about is, I think that, with all the problems with higher education, it still, I think, provides a certain amount of autonomy that certainly online platforms do not. I think kind of keep artists' production free from these incentives of things like monetization, social capital, to name a few. This is not to say that higher education is not deeply flawed, but I think it's worth fighting for. That's all I've got.
And I'll echo that sentiment. Frankie Gutierrez is an illustrator and printmaker working within Southern California's print, zine, and book arts communities. In 2024, they founded the IE Print and Zine Fest and have since served as the event's main organizer, establishing more opportunities for printmakers and zinesters in the area. In addition to lecturing and teaching illustration at Cal State University San Bernardino and RISO 101 at the Armory Center for the Arts here in Pasadena, they operate Blue Basket Press, a small garage studio printing local artists' works and works for the thriving art communities of San Bernardino, Riverside, and the surrounding area. And I'd also say Frankie helps organize a meetup of folks organizing zine fests in Southern California, which is just, I think, such a phenomenal thing to do. So, Frankie.
Took all my money before I got in here. Okay. I'm so glad there's a microphone because I lost my voice. So bear with me here a little bit, and then I had to print something out because percentages and statistics. So I've done a couple talks like this before at various I've done talks at like conferences and different universities, and it's kind of interesting because I'm in Cal State San Bernardino, and the question I always get, especially when I'm in Pasadena, from people from in Pasadena, is like, oh, what the hell, you guys have printmaking in San Bernardino? And I'm kind of like, yeah, we have like the whole industry, and people had to make stuff. And before there was a Xerox machine, which was invented in San Bernardino, we had to screen print things on boxes for fruit. And there's a huge industry for this kind of thing there, and print and publishing. But also because at one point in the 90s, San Bernardino and Riverside had a huge zine community, and it kind of fell to the wayside a little bit. And ironically, now a lot of those organizers back in the day volunteer with my Zine Fest. So it's kind of come full circle, and they're kind of back. It's now kind of a thriving community. But I titled this, zine making when the institution is praying for your downfall and you only have $3, right? Because, as someone who I almost went to Art Center, I went to CCA, and my school just shit their pants and died. So, I'm very aware of what happens when for-profit schools, but, do their thing. But also as a product of the Cal State system, and especially at a place like Cal State San Bernardino, which I'm sure you're familiar, Bakersfield has very similar student demographics. They're quite literally operating on like $3, and that $3 is the money they're gonna need to get food, take the bus, and do everything they need to live that day. So oftentimes it feels really weird when I'm like, hey, you need to make like 50 copies of a book, and they're like, what? And they look at us like, but I have $3. And I'm like, I know, I also have $3 to buy this stuff for you, right? So one thing about San Bernardino, I will say, to provide context for this as well. So 88% of San Bernardino, 88% of the students at Cal State San Bernardino are from San Bernardino and Riverside County. Now, 70% of them are Hispanic or self-identifying as Hispanic. Latinx, Latino, all of that. And then the rest of the demographics are just kind of scattered. So when we talk about marginalization at San Bernardino, I kind of joke with the students like, hey, you guys don't quite feel marginalized here because we throw a rock and you're going to hit someone that looks like you. But when you leave this place, and for sure, for the undocumented students, because our university alone serves over 700, but that's only self-identifying students. I think the entire Cal State system serves over 10,000 undocumented students that have actually come forward and said that they are undocumented. But 88% of the students do not leave the Inland Empire. That means they do K through 12, post-secondary, graduate school. They work and live and breathe in the Inland Empire. So it's a very particular kind of student demographic. So we're kind of, from the start, I think about zine making as nurturing a community of people that actively, once they leave my classroom, are going to start putting back into that same community. And we're kind of creating our own little island out there. So whenever people are like, you guys have that out there? I'm like, yeah, we got tons of stuff out there, right? We got a lot of warehouses, and that's horrible, but we have a lot of stuff going on out there, right? So I really, really am in love with teaching to transgress. That was one of the first books I read when I decided that I wanted to be a college professor. But I'll just kind of read this out. Any radical pedagogy must insist that everyone's presence is acknowledged. That insistence cannot simply be simply stated. It has to be demonstrated through pedagogical practices. To begin, the professor must genuinely value everyone's presence, right? So I take a lot of, I take it very dearly to heart to practice something called radical vulnerability with my students, because I look at them and they're looking at me and I'm like, we are one and the same, brother. We're getting through this together. And then also I attract all the queer and trans students. So I'm just collecting them and I'm like, let's make something cool, right? But teaching at the university level feels extremely weird because when I first started making zines, I was stealing from my minimum wage job. I was making zines for local artists and bands, and I was just kind of cranking out stuff. So when my students ask me like, how do I do this once I graduate? And I'm like, steal, take the stuff, put it in your bag. They're not paying you enough. Take the stuff, the university buys the stuff, right? But also I will say Cal State San Bernardino is one of the least funded Cal States. We get no money. So I did the math. I called the department, I did the math. We have $58 per student for materials for the entire semester. So yeah, we're operating literally on a shoestring budget, right? So when I say we have $3, it's quite literally, I got $3 to make it work. So my, first things first, talking about zines, I always like to talk about zines as a history rooted in scholarly works. So we go all the way back to the Harlem Renaissance because they were called little magazines then. Everyone is kind of like, zine started with Star Trek. And I'm like, no, it didn't. It started with Black people that were like, I can't get published, so I'm going to take hold of my own legacy and my own words, and I'm going to publish them because we need to liberate ourselves from oppression. And the first way to do that is to become critically aware of how you are and how you intersect into these different systems as a person. So when I start teaching zines, that's usually where I start. And also because I just read out all the stats, my students are the exact demographic of people that really need this. So my first thing is like, I want to give them tools to quite literally liberate themselves from this hellish landscape. So one thing that I always think about is the limitations of the institution, right? For my school, it's funding. Funding is extremely like, my God, our president's always like, we love the arts. He's from Brooklyn. And then, it's like, no, you don't, because you don't give us money to do art, right? So funding, budgeting, grades are a big one. I hate giving out grades for zines and books. It feels really weird. Because how do you put a grade on that? It's someone's lived experience. They are making zines about their mother in the 90s, living through different times, right? So funding, budgeting, grades, fear. There's learning outcomes in the university, and they have a mission statement. If you're a part of the Cal State system, they're doing something called creating global citizens, which is like a whole thing of itself. The time constraints of teaching in only 15 weeks to crank out works. There's the lack of resources. The limitations of free speech, right? Every Cal State university has a free speech zone. So you can go into the zone and say whatever you want, but you cannot say whatever you want when you leave that zone, right? There is also the just like correctness overall of like how we should be teaching different design and art aesthetics and principles. I like to call this one the university to gallery to museum pipeline, because of course the universities inform the galleries and museums of what is good art, and then those two decide if they want to fund the people to make those things, and we're just cranking bodies through the system, right? Double-edged sword of validation. Oftentimes, especially where we are now, we have this blossoming art community. There's new museums being created, but now they kind of put their stamp of approval on these types of artwork that have really operated outside of these systems for so long. So really, what does that stamp of approval mean for the longevity of this kind of making? And then marginalization as a subject of study. So one thing that happens is my students have to kind of grapple with the fact that they are in fact what other students are studying as cases of study, because they are the marginalized ones that they're learning about in books. Right? They're the poor kids that are in the wayside that other people are going to graduate school to like really study and do think pieces about. And that's kind of a shocking realization too. And then history as a thing of the past. So teaching zines as this kind of past thing when really it's active and there's a huge community for it everywhere. I mean, we're here right now and they robbed me before I came up here. There's so much money everywhere. So these are some examples of some things. And I really wanted to highlight photographs of how I have taken it kind of upon myself to bring zines into the art community, but also as an extension of my practice, or of my personal practice, and as my professional practice as an art professor. So these are some of the first zines my students were making. I was able to write a grant to get a risograph because we didn't have one, and we were kind of like, please, 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 and then they finally were like, fine, you can buy one. So we got a risograph, and they started cranking out some really amazing works. But one thing I noticed was all my students' works were incredibly personal. Because zines are transformative and they're political and they should be accessible and they're inherently anti-imperialist, right? So when we're making these things, you have to kind of make with the air of radical vulnerability, and you need to instill that in your students as well. These are all examples of zines actively in the community and kind of taking it to the streets. So this was some photos from the first IE Pride and Zine Fest. And I kind of made it, and I would say like, a lot of them were my students vending, and I was like, it's your first time vending, why not just share zines? And this is a real world example of you made this thing in our class and now go out and sell it or trade it or be a part of the community, because there's different parts of it, right? One thing I'm really proud of, my dad was tasked with making the first open to the public zine library in San Bernardino. Most of them are behind universities and you have to go in special collections, and it's like they're not accessible. This one's accessible Monday through Saturday, 9 to 5. You can go in, you can donate zines. We host monthly zine workshops open to the public. Oftentimes it's me and my students kind of just doing workshops. But these are some examples of that. And this kind of leads back into, it kind of comes full circle, like out on the streets making zines, and then it comes full circle, like making stuff for the institution, right? So these are some things. I've done works with UCR, with Pitzer College, with Pomona College, with what's it called, the Ontario, I never remember their thing, the Ontario Art Museum, I'll just say that, and then Cal State Bakersfield, Fullerton, all these different places. But these are just examples of like hands-on making and what that kind of looks like, because what I'm really trying to get at is teaching accessibility, so they themselves finding ways to make zines more accessible, that for them to create artworks that are accessible to not necessarily like everyone's gonna like it, but it is also kind of feeding back into that zine culture of like, this is accessible to all, it's affordable. Critical thought as mark making, resourcefulness is always a good one, and then of course community building. But that's all I had so far. Yeah, okay.
So next up, Kayla Romberger is an artist, designer, teacher, and co-founder of the bookshop and exhibition space Ulysses in Philadelphia. Her work investigates the intersections of print and digital media and the social uses of the designed and/or printed form to disseminate information, initiate happenings, and foment change. Exhibitions of her work include the BAK Museum in Utrecht, the Netherlands, satellite projects in Miami, the fourth Gwangju Design Biennial in South Korea, I apologize, Tufts University Art Galleries in Boston, and forthcoming at Joan Gallery here in Los Angeles with Ulysses. Romberger holds an MFA from the University of Michigan and teaches at the University of Pennsylvania and the New School's Creative Publishing and Critical Journalism program.
It's good to see some familiar faces too. So I've had an interesting storyline in that I've taught and run an art bookshop at the same time, both of them initiated at the same time. So I've been running a space called Ulysses in Philadelphia, as you mentioned, and it has sort of acted as a parallel pedagogical platform. So when I got the invitation to do the talk, I thought maybe it would be hard to separate what university teaching was from the bookshop, or at least from my experience running this space, it became something that supported my teaching in a university setting, and vice versa. The schools of, or my students from the University of Pennsylvania have definitely been a part of everything we've done at Ulysses, and at times it pushes back on the university, or the university comes to us asking us to serve as a platform for maybe freer thinking that's not allowed within the university as well. But I'll kind of give you a little background about how we even formed. So the bookshop looked like this its first year, and we ran it as if it were the physical embodiment of a periodical, doing quarterly thematic shows. And we were named after Ulysses Carrion, who's definitely a popular figure at the art book fair, but he also had an art bookshop that he ran and started in Amsterdam in the early 70s. And he has all kinds of wonderful things to say about how running an art bookshop is harder than having an archive. So he moved his bookshop into becoming an archive, which somehow factors in later in the talk. I like to tell students this as well, but sometimes just showing up to a talk can be the reason your life changes forever, and that happened with the 4 of us, or the 5 of us that started Ulysses. So we all went to the same Martino Gamper talk at the ICA Philadelphia, and after that, 2 people started chatting. Everyone realized none of us knew each other. We all secretly wanted to run a magazine shop. And then this fateful email came through from G. Wesley to Nerissa Cooney. I think there's something about, like, yeah, it being, I don't know, you'll have to see. It's about being a big fan of printed matter. And here we are, 10 years later. We've done all kinds of fun events, so many different things. I think we've all decided to use it as like a sort of intellectual pursuit and challenge that also incorporated the community. And we went big. We tried to invite some of our largest models when we did it. So we worked with Hardworking Good Looking, doing a publisher residency that you'll see on the left, and Martine Sims did a project with us, and we hosted publishers and brought the students in. And Hardworking Good Looking made this project. It was a form of a zine, I would say, that they basically found a printer that was right. They made most of they're in residence at Ulysses, but through my job at the University of Pennsylvania, they made all their work in the Riesegras studio at Penn, and then the other part was made down the street at just like a copy shop. And the whole thing was kind of, I think, the prompt of this panel too, where the idea of this publication was to it was based on underground publishing that happened in the 70s in the Philippines. That the idea was that you could speak against the government in print, and it would circulate outside the purview of the government. And the title of it is Colombo Bulletin. Instead of bulletin, it's a bulletin, and it also sort of critiques Duterte, the president at the time they made it, and it was made in 2017. And they invited tons of people to kind of collaborate on the project and make it. So this also wasn't for sale, and it circulated sort of like whoever showed up to the event and the students that were involved in it. So 10 years later, we're still running. We've done a lot of different sorts of projects. Last year, we did a project with Camila Janan Rashid, and we made artists multiples in this case. So I'm gonna switch into teaching a little bit. So I started teaching before I opened Ulysses, and this seminal text, which probably has moved many people, really did change my life. Going to printed matter in person and then reading Lucy Lavar's The Artist Book Quotes Public was enough to make me realize that all you have to do is make the zine, and you can kind of affect your community, you can change your world, you don't have to wait for permission. That's like definitely been something that I think about for my own work, but has really been how I've thought about teaching in my classes. So it's a combination of thinking about not waiting for permission and what are the limits you have, and that limit can be anything from maybe all you have is like a desk. So Felix Gonzalez Torres is another big reference that I like to share with students, where he often made work just on his living room table without a lot of resources too, some paper and printer. And my first assignment every semester is either to make a fanzine or to make a Xerox book, both of them at the same timeline. And I think some of it is thinking about like limits of production, limits of the paper, limits of budget, as already mentioned. I teach in a school where students don't feel empowered to be very political, I would say. So what I've found is the best in for it is to have them go deeply personal. So we've had some really beautiful projects. Everything from a fanzine for Kim Kardashian, which was really like a long complaint about having like a really bad job at Urban Outfitters and like having to bike to South Philly every day, and that was like the only relief at the end of the day. Years later, we sell that zine at Ulysses, and it continues to be our bestseller. She still only sells it for $5. She got to raise her prices. More personal projects here. So my other way that I try to empower a student to think about positionality and politics in their work is often giving them hardcore theory, just a little bit sprinkled in each semester. My favorite text is Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, and I read it with the students every semester, time and time again. But he, describes a sort of ambivalent relationship to the mechanically reproduced object, and through it, you are able to critique fascism. And it doesn't do it on the nose, but what I find is that students then come to class able to talk about current politics without me having to talk to them about it. And I find that's really helpful, especially in this particular moment. So we've had really beautiful conversations and very beautiful projects that have come out, often after reading that text. So he talks about like the political uses of mass media a little bit in the project, among other things. But this project is a little hard to tell, but the student made an anti-Verlassenheit party, and it's a term by Hannah Arendt. Verlassenheit is loneliness in German. And in this project, the student made a wishbone that was 3D printed, and it has a magnet on it, and you get an invitation to this anti-loneliness project that has one half of the wishbone. Some of them will stick together, and you'll find your partner to spend time. Lonely ending. So there's a little bit more about that project, and we use the risograph machine to make it. So final theory, I meant to keep my timer going, but I forgot. Definitely I would say Fred Moten's The Undercommons comes into play a lot, where he talks a lot of, it's an important text for a lot of a lot of teachers, I know, because he's thinking about critiquing the university and how the university's quest for professionalization is often at odds with critical thinking. And that like the way that the university is set up is that we're supposed to surpass teaching as teachers. That eventually when you raise in the ranks as a teacher, you no longer have to teach anymore. So what does it mean if the purpose of teaching is to surpass it? What does it mean when you run a space where you're spending all your time engaging with a kind of form of teaching as your side gig? So I would say that maybe my practice is thinking about intermeshing and bringing the university and like extra educational spaces together in some way. Yeah, that's it really. So thank you.
Maybe panelists, we can all come sit up front. I'm going to pull up our names quickly. Because we're supposed to talk into these. So keeping an eye on time, maybe I just want to ask everybody briefly to think about, because for me, organizing this panel and thinking about pulling from different institutions, different student populations, I'm so happy we have a Cal State and Cal UC. Our public institutions are well represented here, but if you could each talk about how you have had students come in with their understanding of what a zine is, how maybe you've needed to challenge that or been surprised by that, and then what you hope when they leave your classroom, they think about a zine being. And anyone wants to start?
Okay. I don't get a lot of students every year. We graduate maybe 9 majors, and we're lucky to have a very diverse group of students. This year I was the only white person in the seminar, and I think that they come in a way other people have said, like the personal is the root to, the personal and the specific is the root to the general. And this is such a boring answer, but a lot of what I work with them on is what's their production level, like in terms of numbers, but also in terms of like how the thing looks like. And one of the things we talk about is the balance between authenticity and authority in the things that you make. So I think one of the things we really are challenged by is like the things that they consider zines are wonderful and speak of who they are. And I'm kind of interested in them seeing like, are there other production levels that can broadcast who they are to like a larger kind of community?
For me, I think of zines as, I like to tell the students the zines are practice, and then it's practice for the real thing, but they're really like the real thing. I think once you make the thing, make it, you print it, it legitimizes something you've done and concretizes it and archives it. And it's amazing how often that continues to hold true. I had a student print an entire FBI file as a book, and then like a librarian from Oxford University bought it from him. I mean, there's just these moments that if you hadn't made the thing, if you didn't print the thing that lived online, those things wouldn't occur. So I see it a little bit of practice.
I guess for me, and I guess I'm really coming from a sort of like visual art, conceptual art sort of background. Like that's where my sort of aim always is. And I think a lot of students, they end up maybe separating their practices into different boxes. So, okay, now I'm making a zine, and now I'm doing my illustration, and now I'm making a painting that goes on a wall in a gallery, rather than seeing all of them as, you know, parts of a larger sort of practice. And Yeah, I don't know. The zine sort of being like a site for the work to happen in a slightly different way.
For me, I think a lot of my students, you kind of talked about like the confidence issue a little bit. I think a lot of them don't understand that what they have to say is important and that like you should write that down right now and make something with it. They don't really understand that, but I also think they can't quite, we are working on it, but they can't quite conceptualize that they themselves can have an art practice, but also that they, a lot of them I think are still on that like, in order to be in the arts, I have to be a teacher because they're so in survival mode that they're not going to have means to live. And I kind of tell them like, you never have to talk to a kid if you don't want to. Like you don't have to teach at all if you don't want to. There's so many other options, and you can just make weird books and have fun, and it be just as meaningful and like important in our world. So I think that's where we're kind of at. But I definitely do. First assignment is always here's a zine. I would say probably like 70% of them have not heard of a zine. And then it's always because of the like paper restraints. It's okay, everybody's gonna get 2 pieces of paper. You have to make something like with these 2 pieces of paper only. That is what you have. You have a limited amount of pages. Figure it out. Let's start researching different types of binding. And then that's kind of their like first design project. And then that kind of kicks off the rest of the time.
And maybe I'd add, I did a project a number of years ago, and I really try to put sharing at sort of the heart of things. So we're, a class of 15 students, we're gonna make sure it's an edition of 25 that I'm asking you to print, but y'all are gonna need to trade with each other and come out with a library of each other's works. And at the end of one quarter, a student came up to me and they were like, I was really bummed out about that when you announced it because I'm putting all this labor into making this thing and then I kind of need to give it away. But then they said, but they were so thrilled, at least this is what they told me to my face. They were so thrilled to have that archive and that reminder of all of their peers' experiences and putting that sharing at the heart versus the competition that we so often see in classroom spaces. Audience questions? I got another one if nobody has anything, but I feel like it's gonna be more. Cool. I'm going to ask one more then while we're all here. Thinking again about these sort of institutional limitations, maybe some of the pedagogical limitations of, yes, we do need to grade them somehow, even though that again feels antithetical. Are there things, I wonder if each of you can think about maybe a limit when you're teaching with zines, something that was surprising to you, a wall you hit that was imposed by the institution that felt like if you were working collaboratively as co-equals versus as students, as much as we create those or try to create those anti-hierarchical spaces, like, yeah, maybe just some limits you've hit up upon.
I want to go first. What do you think about this one?
I don't really think that, I don't know. I feel like my department is like, for better or for worse, we're kind of like on our own little island. So the rest of the university like kind of doesn't know what we're doing. And I don't think they like really care, to be honest. So people are just making really random stuff, right? Like they're doing all kinds of stuff. But I would say like, I can't think of a moment where we like really ran up against something that someone was saying. I would say definitely when there was all of the protests and for the CSU chancellor, where everyone's like about that lady. A lot of the students were kind of realizing that they could take it upon themselves to work with the faculty and staff unions to make things that can be handed out and kind of talk about like being a student worker, being a student and a worker, and then what it means to be in that system and kind of critiquing that system itself. So, but like I said, I feel like those kind of all just went, like, I don't know what they thought about it if someone did receive it. We haven't heard anything. So I'm kind of like, but like, but like keep going, yeah.
I guess I would agree in feeling like at least the departments I'm in at the moment are their sort of own little island, and we can kind of get away with a lot. I guess for me, one of the biggest limitations is maybe the students' sort of anxieties, or sort of not feeling that they have the agency to sort of put things out into the world. I always try and do a sort of like public art assignment where, you know, you have to go on campus and do something crazy, or like put something, I don't know, that's sort of, going to sort of get people's attention out sort of into public. And it's really hard to get them to engage with that in a way that's not kind of like, okay, I'm going to do this for 5 seconds and then like run away, to actually to own it. Yeah.
I have a question, but after your answer. Well, I was on a panel with Alex a year and a half ago, and something just occurred to me. Is the digital format ever a possibility with your students, or is that like against what you're working with in the physical? How are you all thinking about digital zine versus print?
For my students, the first hurdle is, how the hell do you open up a file? Yeah, like, I'm not even kidding. I had a student that was like, hey, how do I get the thing? Like, they are so analog, it's kind of crazy. I'm like, hey, like, they're all like covered in grease and just like setting type and printing like old timey all day long, or like blowing glass, or like we have a whole like, they're like casting bronze. So they come in like covered in like schmutz, and I'm like, hey, you know, let's make something. And they're like, okay, how do I get the file on Google Drive? And I'm like, how the heck did you get here? You had to apply to this. Like, what? So the first step is always like, okay, let's like look through all these tools and let's assess what tools we have. And then we can see what would be like the best order of operations to achieve what you want your final outcome to be.
I try to always make the students do digital. I've gone in and out of having some kind of digital corollary to their projects, but it's been an interesting battle because the print always outlasts the digital project. They're these beautiful moments and very ephemeral and important in a way for them to, I think, like engage with each other and their friends and widen their networks a little bit with it. And it's also like a challenge around like the programmatic part, I think. But I feel like I'm eternally wondering and like plagued more and more about how to archive those projects, which has come down to like screen recording your website sometimes and a bunch of screen captures. Another thing to think about. Yeah.
I think for me, like, it's really important that my students think about who the audience is. And I feel like that's easier for them to understand when the scale is like 1 to 100 of things rather than the internet, which feels a bit amorphous. Also, it's almost like the opposite situation. Mine are so comfortable with the digital space that I think it's meaningful for them to engage in something which is physical.
And I'll just say, I have a very clear memory of my first full year of teaching, or sorry, my first post-COVID year of teaching on our campus. A student showed up when we were doing a letterpress project on the Vandercooks with rubber-based ink, and I got out this can of Reflex Blue, and a student in a cashmere sweater came over and just like leaned right into it. And it was sort of glorious, but it was also that like they were so detached from the tactility and the understanding. And then, you know, once they saw the ink on the paper and, you know, saw the possibility of the print, it felt like that adherence to analog print was like cemented somehow. I think that the bigger challenge for me now as an instructor is figuring out how we can generate a level of excitement in our print shop where they're sneaking in at night to print the posters for the student strike, or coming in to utilize the materials as they've traditionally been used. And some of our alumni are doing this very well, but like taking from the university, taking from some of those resources to support their practice afterwards. And that's a largesse that at least my campus can within limits support. So figuring out how to support it.
I would say for me, and I'm just getting over a semester of really like dealing with this, is there seems to be a sort of lack of intentionality when it comes to making digitally sort of forward work. It'll come time for critique and it's like, okay, well, here's the file, just open it up in preview. And it's like, no, you have to think about this as its own site, or sort of how can it sort of live other than just this file that, like, I don't know, maybe you send it in a group chat or something, or like it lives in your Dropbox forever or something. I don't know. It has to go beyond that.
Thank you, everybody. We will maybe hang out outside, but the next panel is coming in. Can we give a hand for our panel?